Welcome to Way Too Early Wednesday. It is part 2 of the depth chart series, version 1, both. I don't know. Do you call them volume or version, Bill?
I call them version because volume implies there's like multiple
Multiple.
items. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I crushed that. Version 1.0. And we are on to the defense today. If you missed the offense that was on the podcast daily for Tuesday, he's Bill Landis and I am Austin Ward. And I suspect that the conversation with the Silver Bullets probably won't have as many debating points. Not that we had a ton of them even on offense, but there were a couple. Defense seems pretty straightforward, except for maybe our own debate with what the coaching staff should do with a couple pieces on that side
yeah,
of the football.
yeah. What's it? Is it 8 starters back? Technically, it's like eight and a half. Really, I think if you include Cody Simon, who was basically a starter for the back half of the season. So there's not a whole lot of mystery. Yeah, there are some questions, I guess, about where exactly some guys could slot in and perhaps move around. But when I do the depth chart projections, I try to steer away from like I think this should happen, and keep it more like this is the way of the world right now, and maybe acknowledge a little bit that things could change. So I guess that's what we'll try to do here.
Well, we can take both approaches today.
Yeah,
Podcast daily is a little more freewheeling. You don't have to just purely advocate for what you want, but you can do that and acknowledge that maybe CJ Hicks will be playing at linebacker when practice starts in March.
yeah. CJ Hicks is likely to be playing at linebacker in March, and we'll see where he's playing in September. And where Sonny Styles perhaps is playing in September. I think those are the two kind of key guys here when we talk about moving parts. But I guess should we start on the front end? We'll start with the defensive line. I guess that makes the most sense, right?
Yeah. This should
Yeah,
be really hard. Really
there's
hard.
there's no mystery there. My projected defensive ends are Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau.
Oh,
And
okay.
my projected defensive tackles are Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton. The depth piece is interesting. Like we know who the players are, especially at defensive end, but what do those roles look like for Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry? I think is an interesting storyline for this offseason and into the 2024 season. And then who emerges as like that third, fourth, fifth defensive tackle is one really important, and two, I think also interesting. But when it comes to the top four, there is no mystery. We know who the top four are because they basically returned their starting defensive line from last year.
So, yeah, we don't have to belabor that point. It's obvious, and it's also very, very good for Ohio State that is the four that they can build around. I think that's when you're talking about proven production, veteran experience, high end NFL ability, you're not going to find a starting group much better or one that is better than what Ohio State has coming back. If you like Ty Hamilton, and we talked about this in snap judgments when he returned, he's the most quote unquote susceptible to somebody pushing into that rotation, taking some snaps away from him. Probably, I mean, Tyleik Williams probably would benefit from more rotation and not having to play the volume of snaps that he did a year ago. Yes, I said that out loud and admitted that maybe some rotation would be good there for the tackles. Who amongst that next group in, because I think we know who the two are and what that rotation would look like on the edge. What are you looking for when March rolls around from those guys that are pushing their way in?
The one that I'm most interested in is Tywone Malone, only because I thought he might do that last year, and in hindsight, like maybe that was expecting too much of a guy coming into a new program and like focusing solely on football and like quasi changing positions. I think from not changing positions, but changing like a style of defense from a 3-4 to a 4-3. So that just didn't add up to really to any playing time for him. But he has a recruiting pedigree, and now he's going into his fourth year as a college football player. That I think it should click for him. So I'm looking for him to make a pretty big push this offseason. That's a little bit of a mystery still, exactly what that could look like. I think we know what it could look like for a guy like Hero Canoe, right? And we saw a little bit of it last year, and when he played a handful of meaningful snaps and found himself on the field in some high leverage moments. I thought he looked comfortable, and he's a bigger bodied guy, can take up some of those double teams. I think do some of the things that Ty Hamilton does for you, which again is like the dirty work and unheralded stuff, but really important stuff. I think Hero can be that guy. And then I'm not going to try not to list every single defensive tackle, but I do think I think it's open enough that you conceivably could, right? Maybe you're not looking for like Eric Mensah as a true freshman to do much this year, but I think everybody else you expect to take a step forward. So like Caden McDonald, I think needs to be in that conversation. I think Jason Moore needs to be in that conversation, and maybe he as like more of an interior pass rusher compared to the other guys we're talking about. Maybe he can provide you not what you're missing with Mike Hall, because Mike Hall was really good, but something along those lines to give you a pass rushing specialist, so to speak, in the middle of your defensive line. So I think it's open for really anybody. But the guy that is most interesting to me is Tywone Malone, because I think there's a lot of reason to be excited about him. But we also don't really have much of an idea of what that could look like.
Yeah, I agree with you, and we can set aside the Hero Canoe conversation for now because everybody watching the podcast daily regularly already knows that I'm the president of that fan club, and if that role goes, like it was already starting to climb to 4 or 5, 8 to 10 snaps to go in there and help against the run. If that becomes, the possibility of 12 to 15, that wouldn't surprise me at all. That'd be really good for Ohio State. I do think back that you're right with Tywone Malone. We thought with the two, open practices, open viewing windows in August, like physically, that was the part that we were going off of. Like, wow, this guy shows up mature. He's filled out, he's strong, he can move pretty impressively in the drills. Like maybe this is going to happen like pretty quickly for him. And there were still people that thought that into the middle of August. And then it just kind of, I'm not really sure what happened. As you said, maybe it was the transition, learning new positions and giving up baseball and focusing on football full time. It just didn't quite connect the way it looked like it could. But everybody saw the physical tools. You walk out on the field, you pick out Tywone Malone, you know that he's got that potential in him to be a game changer for Ohio State. And he's also got that key couple first letters in his name, which is imperative for Ohio State if you're going to play defensive tackle. And I'm going to call them the triumvirate. And it's going to be dominant. It's going to be, get ready.
Sounds like a
triumvirate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to sell it.
All three of them on there. Yeah.
I'm going to sell it starting in spring practice. It'll be.
I'd buy one. I'll buy one.
Yeah.
You got a customer here.
Yeah. Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
That's right. If you can reach one person, that's the goal out there. So,
that's right.
All right. That about covers the defensive line. Again, not a lot of drama. A lot of returning production. Still room for all of them to grow. That includes Jack and JT. We talked about that in their decision to return to Ohio State. You want to see more sacks. You want that team leading total to be up, past 6, but there's never an opportunity quite like what Ohio State has right here. This is, I don't want to get ahead of it because we're just in January, but it's got all the pieces that it's like 2017 type depth and production. So we'll see if that does transpire once they get back out there. It feels like the entire back 7 is tied together. I don't even know the best way to tackle it, Bill.
Well, I think you can get the obvious ones out of the way, right? Like the starting outside corners are Denzel Burke and Davis Nigbanosin. And then maybe Jermaine Matthews can make it so that Denzel and Davison aren't playing every single snap when the game is still in the balance. And I think he's ready for that. But I still think those two guys are going to dominate the outside corner snaps. And like, not to jump around and make it confusing, but like Lathan Ransom is going to play a ton, obviously, as a returning starter, presumably at the banda position where he's played the last couple of years. And then it gets a little fuzzy. Like, Jordan Hancock and Sonny Styles are going to play. What's that look like exactly? And then that Cody Simon is going to play. I think I feel pretty confident now saying that Cody Simon is this team's starting like linebacker, right? Until someone tells me different or we see something different with our eyes. I feel like he earned that last year with the way that he played, especially after Tommy was kind of on the shelf with his injury. I thought Cody stepped up in a major way and played really well. And they probably need like his veteran presence in the middle of that defense too. He's just like a smart, experienced guy who is probably more talented than we give him credit for. And I think has gotten significantly better over the last couple of years as well. So I kind of feel like that spot is solid. So then it's like, will linebacker nickel, what does that look like? because I think even free safety, like we would say, it's Malik Hartford's job to lose. I would think, unless something crazy happens and they have an opportunity to like bring in Caleb Downs. But short of that, I think it's Malik Hartford's job. So then it's Sonny Styles, Jordan Hancock, CJ Hicks. How do those three coexist? And because there's just still a lot up in the air, like my projection is basically what it was last year. Like Sonny and Jordan split the nickel spot, and CJ is your starting will linebacker to take over for Steel Chambers. But I certainly don't think that's solidified. I think the ideal version of this defense finds a way to get all three of those guys playing more often than not, especially Sonny and Jordan, who have played and have been productive. Like, I think you have to find a way for them to coexist in a world where Lathan Ransom is back and starting. But it's not a bad problem to have, but I do think it's something that Jim Knowles and now Matt Guerrieri, James Laurinaitis kind of all have to get together and figure out the best way for this to work.
Yeah, it's hard. As we said off the top, like, I'm not even meaning this as like purely advocation that Sonny Styles needs to play linebacker. We've talked about that. Bobby Carpenter, who is certainly like in the Woody a lot and around the weight room and knowing what's going on, like managing, Sonny managing his weight and what's going to happen with him. It feels like there's an acknowledgement that's not just us saying, hey, this would be cool and beneficial for Ohio State in our opinion. Like, it does feel like everybody is wrapping their arms around the idea that Sonny needs to play linebacker. And there was a lot more conversation from Jim Knowles and other as dating back to August. And he, maybe he'll be more careful with his words. Maybe he won't in the future about unleashing CJ Hicks and doing all these things to get his athleticism on the field. To me, it feels like the best way to do that is incorporating the jack position. And I think that's where all these things blend together. What we think is potentially the best use of the personnel, I don't think is different than what the coaching staff sees. But March and figuring out a depth chart in January is that's going to be hard for them to actually follow through with that, in my opinion, to say, let's do this right now. Now, maybe the way Sonny approaches mat drills, and if he lifts and he doesn't have to like count calories and eat ice cubes at night, like maybe that decision is made because he shows up on the first week of March and he's 255 pounds, in which case he cannot play safety. And then does that mean he's now competing with CJ Hicks? Does that mean, I think we can all agree that Cody Simon is going to start at the Mike linebacker and anchor this unit. So does that be the impetus to move CJ and let him do things that are closer to the line of scrimmage? I don't know. I think probably the safe part of version 1.0 is just saying, well, Sonny's probably going to line up at safety. Maybe that means some combination of bandit adjuster flipping with Sonny and Lathan, and you've reevaluate throughout March. Like, that's probably the safe way if we're nailing it down. Is that the way that I think it'll end? I do not think so.
I think you could, and I've gone back and forth on this a little bit, like project Sonny and Lathan as like the starting deep safeties and like figure it out. Maybe that is the safest way to do it now. I think those two compared to Malik Hartford has the better skill set to play like the deep middle. I think I want Sonny and Lathan closer to the ball. And I think I'm just a man with opinions who watches football. I think Sonny Styles' future in football is closer to the line of scrimmage, whether that's an off-ball linebacker or an on-the-ball linebacker. I think CJ Hicks' future in football is probably like an on-ball linebacker, like a 3-4 defensive end. Whether or not Ohio State embraces that, like I don't know. They've struggled to do that, I think, with similar style athletes. Byron Browning, I think, being the shining, or maybe not shining, but being the best example of that, just like not quite being able to figure out what that is. And I think this collection of talent does put an onus on this defensive staff to like figure it out, even if that means tweaking some things you've done traditionally. For example, always playing a 4-down front. You're not doing yourself, I think, a service by sticking to that and then, limiting the role of a guy like CJ Hicks, or perhaps playing Sonny Styles in a spot that's not the best for him. And I'm not saying like switch to a 3-down and only play 3-down. I just think they need to embrace like variability in their offense. Like, don't be afraid to mix it up a little bit, get some of these guys on the field in roles that make sense for them. And I think elevate your defense's ceiling by getting guys on the field in positions to make plays on the ball who are like freaky height, weight, speed athletes. And I don't know that Ohio State has sort of always done that. And that's not like they were a very good defense last year. I'm not saying that they missed an opportunity to do that and then weren't as good as they could have been. It was hard to be better than they were last year. They were really good statistically in a lot of categories, and I expect them to be this year. But I think when you are as veteran as they are and returning as many guys as they are, and now you're going into year 3 in this defensive system, you should embrace the opportunity to try on some new things and maybe play some different personnel packages that gets your best 11 on the field more often than not. Whether or not they do that, I'm not sure, but I think that's kind of where they are when we talk about guys like Sonny and CJ. And maybe I'm totally off base and thinking that's where they're best suited. But I don't think I'm alone in that opinion that Sonny should probably be playing linebacker and CJ should probably be up on the line of scrimmage. So whether or not we'll see if they arrive at the same point. I think there's some time here to kind of figure out exactly what all that looks like. But that's sort of the biggest question for me with this defense is not so much like finding starters. It's like finding roles, I think, for guys that maybe need to change it up a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great point because, I was thinking tie this all together, and you said best 11. Well, we started this defensive depth chart breakdown by talking about all the depth that they have up front, and they got JT back and they got Jack back. That may have, if one of those two guys leave or both, maybe we're having a very different conversation about could CJ Hicks be an answer there? Is that where Arvell Reese has to be moving forward on a full-time basis? So I have to keep that part in mind as well when I'm talking about some people's opinion, including my own, that CJ would be very good doing the jack role and playing the position that Jim Knowles used at Oklahoma State and throughout his career, really everywhere until he got to Ohio State. I think, man, he's perfectly suited for that. But that's the trade-off they have to consider. Caden Curry's also got a really good motor and needs more snaps and needs to probably be on the field more often if we're talking about finding roles. Mitchell Melton is someone who has been talked about doing that a lot and creating pressure off the edge for Ohio State and doing, some versatile stuff to confuse defenses. All right, well, that's 2. If you want to use Kenyatta Jackson, that's another spot where you may not need CJ Hicks to help. So the defensive depth and the amount of options that they have to play with up there, and what is clearly a desire from Larry Johnson to use them in a 4-down front, maybe doesn't provide them that opportunity to move CJ Hicks. And that would be fine. If that's again, if you look at last season, what are the results that we're going to argue with? Are there players like you and Berm talked about this all the time? And I think to a lot of extent, you're right. Get these guys experience in games, build that more so that you have something more. Like CJ Hicks is going into year 3. We've still barely seen him in high leverage snaps, which, that's also tied to practice habits and all the other things. I don't know that we can really argue with the live, meaningful reps that defense got outside of the second half against Michigan, which again is very important. But if you're looking at the number of bodies and the options at linebacker, the truth is he's probably more valuable there than doing what we think might be best with the Baron Browning. Is this untapped potential position stuff?
Yeah.
That's probably the way of the world there.
Yeah, that could be the case. I think one area where I would like to see the defense take a step forward is generating more havoc, which we've talked about. And I think the way you do that is by putting more speed on the field. So I think keeping an open mind and having a willingness to be creative with guys like Sonny and CJ could help you unlock some more of that, or even playing Kenyatta Jackson a little more, or even Mitchell Melton, the little bit that he did play, I thought showed some decent pass rushing chops, and which just they're a little bit different than Jack and JT. It's like different flavors of defensive end. Not one's better than the other, but I think it's nice to have change ups to throw at teams. And I think the best defenses are able to do that. Not everyone has the luxury that Ohio State has of having multifaceted players kind of all over the place. The challenge is finding, the right ways to utilize it and right times to utilize it. But it shouldn't be a hindrance to you. And I also think too, we're talking about 3rd, 4th, 5th year players. We're not talking about oh, you got to find a spot for this true freshman to do something. If we were having a similar conversation 2 years ago, I would probably think to myself, we're talking about too much defense for a team that has too much to learn. Yeah, you're going into the third year of Jim Knowles, but and basically everyone here is at least in their third year of playing college football, if not older. They should be able to handle more. So I wouldn't be so nervous about that, especially this time of year in spring. Maybe you try it in spring, you come out thinking like, no, that's too much. They couldn't handle it. We gotta pare it down some. But I guess I would say like nothing should be off the table with this defense. And like the idea is best 11, but I think they're going to end up thinking to themselves they have like 14, 15, 16 guys that can be really impactful for them, and they should be able to find a way to utilize all of it in a way that keeps their best players on the field in the most meaningful moments, but also embraces that depth and embraces that versatility and helps the defense take a step forward.
I just bring it up because I think that CJ Hicks is the, I don't know, most fascinating, most up in the air player on this defense going in spring. And maybe Ohio State doesn't actually agree with that for the reasons that I laid out before, that the need and the urgency to make him a linebacker, a starting linebacker, is probably more pressing than let's get creative and use him as a jack or a defensive end. And I understand that. And you and I have brought this idea up 3, 4, 5 times throughout the last, month and a half. And maybe I want to say that part out loud, not just for people who are listening to the podcast daily, but for myself, because if he's out there next to Cody Simon in the first practice of March, which I think he probably will be, like, I don't think I should be disappointed by that fact, like, or
No,
fighting to prove that, like, I was right and I had this great idea and the coaching staff agreed, like, because that probably won't happen. Like, I want it to be clear, because I have floated that myself a number of times, and I do still think that would probably be like the Baron Browning ideal of what he's doing, what he's done at the NFL level that he didn't get to do at Ohio State. But it doesn't mean that if it doesn't happen, that something's wrong. Like, because also CJ Hicks probably really wants the opportunity to prove himself right at an outside
sure.
linebacker position.
Yeah. No, I'm not going to be upset if CJ's playing will linebacker when we go out to the first spring practice. It's just like I will be upset, I guess, if Sonny Styles and Jordan Hancock aren't on the field all the time. Like that's the trade-off, right? It's I don't want to see a split at the nickel position. I think those two are too good to share a spot. So they got to figure it out. I'm not saying like they have to be on the field every single snap, but I don't I don't want to see a game where like Jordan Hancock plays 50 snaps and Sonny plays 15 or vice versa, depending on the matchup. I think both those guys have skill sets that you should be able to play them against anybody, as long as you're putting and you can find spots for them to be successful against anybody. So that's the challenge here is figuring out where all these multi-positional pieces fit or how they fit together. Um, and all the coaches like kind of being on the same page about the best way to do that. And it's not about Ohio State. Like it's not the difference between like having a good defense and a bad defense. I think this defense like baseline is going to be very, very good. Um, it's just a matter of like ceiling. And I think, I think that the potential is there for this to be one of the best defenses maybe we've ever seen at Ohio State if they embrace some of the stuff we're talking about, moving guys around.
Yeah. I mean, these are luxury problems. You're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
improving a defense that was top 2 or 3 already in the country, but they're this new world and an expanded playoff and an expanded Big Ten and more games. Like,
Mhm.
you're gonna you're gonna need to max out your defense to get through multiple games in a playoff. Like,
Yeah.
that's just gonna be, that's the reality of this. And I think that it's got to be encouraging for Ohio State fans, for the program to look at this compared to just where they were 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and say the offense doesn't have to go win every single game, because that does get hard. We see high scoring games in the national championship all the time, but and really good offenses are hard to stop. But I don't think Ohio State wants to be in 43, 42 games moving forward, and they
No.
shouldn't be.
Yeah, no, they shouldn't be. And I don't think they will be. But to your point about the changing Big Ten, they're all like different styles of offense are coming to the Big Ten too. Like Ohio State could expect every year prior to this coming season to like play half their games in a phone booth with the way that the Big Ten offenses just sort of operate. And some years more than that, but that's not going to be the case with Washington and Oregon and UCLA and USC. So I think there's going to be there are 4 teams bringing better and more athletic offenses to the conference, and like Ohio State is well positioned to defend that. But I do think it will require some adaptation on their part when they're facing those offenses that you're just not used to seeing on a week in and week out basis in the Big Ten.
All right. Well, that's version 1.0. Looking at the defense, covered both sides of the football. I don't think we need to do special teams in January, do we, Bill?
No, not yet. Maybe
I don't,
maybe later in the year when we're starving for content.
Yeah. I don't know that that's a full episode of the podcast daily in January, so we'll spare you from that. We covered both sides of the football. Obviously, we got a couple more episodes to go as the week goes on. We'll try and get Byrne back out here for some more recruiting information, because I'm ultimately heading to Disney World at the end of the week. But there could be some other things for us to discuss as the coaching staff moves continue to go on behind the scenes, and Ryan Day looks for an offensive coordinator, and maybe there will be, I don't know, a press conference for another position in the Ohio State athletic department in the days ahead. Who knows? Anything could happen. Whatever does, we'll break it down for you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us on this way too early Wednesday. For Bill Landis, I'm Austin Ward. We'll talk to you later.